So it's time now to welcome up two folks who have done a lot to make this whole symposium possible and are going to help ground us a little bit in the spirit of 76, using some materials that are near and dear to my heart. I make podcasts with a lot of archival material. Films like this, digging through old footage and radio broadcasts is exciting to me. So I'm very curious to kind of get back into that time of 76. And to do that, we've got Luis Campos, who is the Baker College Chair for the History of Science, Technology, and Innovation at Rice University, and Robin Scheffler, the Associate Professor of MIT's Program in Science, Technology, and Society.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and I just want to echo Professor Medina's thanks to everybody who worked so hard to bring the symposium together, who supported it, and to make the incredible play that's going to be in dress rehearsal tonight, and then in its short, but I think fully booked run for the next 2 weekends. With that, I would like to transport you to the spirit of 76. And as you've had some intimation, in 1976, two major revolutions, the anniversary of the Democratic Political Revolution of 1776 and the molecular revolution that was unfolding converged here in Cambridge. It was an unsettled moment for both American society and American science. On the one hand, the Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers had testified to the possible erosion, uncertainty of democracy in American society. And for medicine and science, questions about the safety of nuclear power, the presence of pesticides in the environment, and the existence and emergence of terrifying new diseases, whether or not they were imaginary or all too real, all placed as sort of a heavy shadow over the future of science and democracy.
So Cambridge is a really promising place to have these discussions. A diverse city of 100,000 people, a third of whom were students and a third of whom worked in blue-collar jobs, and a city where 15% of the residents lived in public or in subsidized housing. And of course, Cambridge was home to two of the world's leading institutions for molecular biology research, both Harvard and MIT. And so scientists who wanted to do their work and who needed a lab to do so would be brought into a discussion that was pretty much unprecedented in its design and in its scope. And Cambridge offered a forum then where concerns about safety and expertise, science and democracy all came together. So this is what we mean when we invoke the spirit of 76. So let's connect with this spirit of 76 and see it through the eyes of some of the documentarians of WGBH, a little 2-minute clip here, who created the NOVA show, The Gene Engineers, in the immediate aftermath of these debates.
There's nothing but the helpless. It's the people versus the science of all. And it has surfaced, and they're now speaking up.
I am convinced that when the people of the community understand the unbelievably unknown nature of the dangers, tampering with millions of years of evolution, they'll say no.
The city council should not play with it. You should not ban it completely forever. That would be a very, very stupid thing to do.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, June 1976. A busy, crowded city and home of Harvard University. The city council is about to take action that will stun the world of science. It asks Harvard not to begin a new type of research until the council has decided whether or not to ban it completely. The research planned for this laboratory involves the engineering of genes.
Once upon a time ago.
In Cambridge, the debate over the new experiments has spilled into the streets.
We, Science for the People, are here to try to bring the issues of this controversy to the public, to the people, because the people are at risk and are at benefit from the experiments that are being done with recombinant DNA.
The idea of genetic engineering going on in his city horrifies Cambridge Mayor Alfred Vellucci.
I'm worried about all the presentations that were made by scientists at the city council meeting. It was stated in the city council that anything could come out. In fact, they don't even know what's going to eventually come out of this experimentation. It could be anything. It could be contamination, infections, something that could crawl out of the laboratory, such as a Frankenstein.
The feeling has been generated that we want to work in a laboratory with things known to be dangerous. That's not at all the case. Nothing we plan to work with is known to be dangerous. Now, as to the unknown, one can do one's best about trying to figure out what might lie ahead, but research deals with the unknown.
This film will show how scientists and the public are trying to come to terms with a dramatic new technique, a technique that gives scientists unprecedented power to manipulate nature.
As we've seen in our videos this morning, concern over the safety of recombinant DNA was something that sparked a nationwide discussion in the 1970s. And as we heard, it was in late '75 that many in the scientific community were ready to move forward using these guidelines. So with these discussions that had taken place at Asilomar that led to the federal guidelines that the NIH then endorsed, and with these new regulations for different levels of laboratory design that existed, this is a comic that came out later in Trends in Biochemical Sciences, P1 was the minimal level of precaution, and P4 was the most intense that was reserved for the deadliest of pathogens. But not all members of the scientific community, as you've already seen, have been as optimistic about the benefits of these genetic engineering techniques, and in particular, about decisions that they felt were being made without public participation. And in particular, Science for the People, a leftist group with a substantial chapter in Boston and Cambridge, critiqued the Asilomar process, both for the ways in which it was framing the risks around recombinant DNA work, and for having engaged in an expert-led, anti-democratic process that they felt was prone to conflicts of interest and to corporate malfeasance. And you've heard this line already, that it's like asking the tobacco industry to limit the manufacture of cigarettes.
By the start of 1976, the debate over Asilomar and recombinant DNA came to Cambridge, giving critics of the process another opportunity to make their concerns known. And we've mentioned, of course, that Harvard and MIT are at the vanguard of molecular biology research in these decades and many decades since, but back in the 1970s, they were not in the vanguard of laboratory design. They lacked the new facilities that the NIH guidelines thought were necessary to conduct these experiments safely. In particular, Harvard's biolabs, set within the densely populated neighborhood around Harvard Square, were ant-infested. They had plumbing problems. They were desperately in need of upgrades to allow research to continue under the new NIH guidelines. This was not a discussion that Harvard thought would draw much public concern. Indeed, here is the notice that appeared in the Cambridge Chronicle in February 1976, announcing their plans for the laboratory renovations. Of course, it's a bit hard to see where it originally printed, so we've zoomed up for you. This is how the university initially thought it would fulfill its duty to sort of seek public comment and inform the public. I would note, of course, that the words health or safety doesn't appear anywhere here. But despite the muted response from the Cambridge public in the winter, the efforts to modify the laboratories drew intense internal dissent.
They're planning the safest laboratory in the building, but this isn't the safest building,
a postdoc said.
If I come here at 8 at night, I could open my desk right here and there'd be roaches running over everything. Heck, all the sugar in this building is covered so the ants don't get to it.
Opposition also came from Professor Ruth Hubbard, the first woman tenured in the Harvard Biology Department and also a researcher working in the biolabs. She and her husband, the Nobel Prize winner and anti-war activist George Wald, both felt it was
madness to do this work in antiquated laboratories in a crowded city.
As discussion developed at Harvard, fears centered on improper laboratory techniques and the inability to contain organisms safely within the lab. The WGBH NOVA documentary illustrated how easily things might go wrong. A technician spills or eats a sandwich with hands unwashed, a common practice that's often lambasted by safety experts, or mouth pipettes, or has an issue with a technique that ends up spraying potential pathogens around the laboratory, or simply ends an experiment and pours it down the drain.
So any potential hazards would therefore affect not only scientists, but others in and near the laboratories. And a Harvard secretary told Ruth Hubbard
that discussions about the proposed laboratory should not be isolated to faculty members and the biology department, but are a matter of general interest and should therefore involve non-scientific university staff, among others.
And so on May 25th, the non-scientist staff in the biological laboratories building petitioned the dean to appoint one of their own to the biohazard committee. And these were requests that would continue into the following year, as you see here. So Harvard had a mechanism for these high-level controversies as a legacy of the Vietnam War. The University Committee on Research Policy held a hearing on recombinant DNA research in the Science Center so that experts and laypersons alike would have the opportunity to be heard. It also brought the issue much more visibility. And there were several hours of dramatic debate among scientists who had shared sides in previous political debates, but who split over this issue. Hubbard was there, and she had brought someone else with her, her friend, the Cambridge City Councilor and former mayor, Barbara Ackerman, who stood up in the audience at one point and said, "I just want to say that we're here." The message was not lost on anyone. Hubbard had also reached out to reporters, including two at the Boston Phoenix, an alternative newspaper that wrote a long article about the controversy. The Phoenix asked,
"How do you defend yourself against a microorganism which has never existed before, whose effects are completely unknown, which cannot be seen, which reproduces itself, and which scientists may not even know has escaped?" Hubbard and Wald also brought the Phoenix article to Alfred Vellucci, Cambridge's bombastic, flamboyant mayor, a 6th grade dropout, and a 23-year veteran of the city council. And so, with Vellucci's entry, an internal university fight became a local political controversy. Within a month, the mayor would proclaim that
"Science fiction has arrived unannounced to Cambridge. The vision of the future has been dumped on our city." They were dribbling out information about ants and cockroaches and fleas and flies and things that were going to crawl. Of course, they scared the hell out of me. They sent chills up and down my spine.
As you heard, Cambridge and Boston are going through a moment of economic upheaval in the 1970s, and working-class Vellucci had long used antagonism with Harvard as a way of bolstering his own political fortunes and serving the interests of Cambridge. He had threatened to turn Harvard Yard into a parking lot to address parking concerns. And I'm not sure what public need this meant, but he also thought the offices of the Harvard Lampoon should be turned into a public urinal. And in his hands, the recombinant DNA debate takes on new life as a potent town gown issue within Cambridge.
The scientists at Harvard University or MIT at that, they knew they were doing and dealing with dangerous work, because even your own scientists at Harvard and MIT challenge you. It wasn't the layman that challenged you, it was the scientific world, or half that scientific world, or part of that scientific world that challenged you and said, you know, maybe there could be, we don't know. And when you begin to talk in the terms of we don't know, then a man like myself becomes skeptical, and I have to protect the health, the welfare, and the safety of all the people in the city of Cambridge. Now, you know, the question comes, does the city of Cambridge have the power to stop any scientific work in the city of Cambridge?
On another occasion, Vellucci added,
"It's about time the scientists began to throw all their goddamn shit right out on the table so we can discuss it. Who the hell do scientists think they are, that they can take federal tax dollars that are coming out of our tax returns and do research work that then we cannot come in and judge?"
So, what Vellucci did was amplify the questions about governance and trust in scientists' capacity for self-regulation that had previously been raised by groups within the scientific community, such as Science for the People.
"I'm a veteran politician. They are hypocrites. We didn't cause a bomb to fall on Hiroshima. We didn't cause DDT to be spread all over the land of this country and poison cows and poison animals and foodstuffs and vegetables. We didn't do that. They did it."
Cambridge began to make national news, and younger scientists found that their concerns could draw national attention. Vellucci proposed that the city of Cambridge could actually prohibit research using recombinant DNA until the city was satisfied about its safety. Vellucci was determined to make recombinant DNA into a political hot potato for Harvard and MIT. And the day before the hearing, Vellucci sent a letter to his fellow mayors warning of an epidemic.
So we had this meeting. I didn't realize it was going to be the stormiest meeting of my political life. There were scientists versus scientists, doctors versus doctors, biologists versus biologists. They were disagreeing. Then they were getting heated. Then they were getting overheated. Then they began calling each other names. And then they began calling each other liars.
The journal Science would later call it a debate between two scientific camps slugging it out in public.
So on the very same day that the federal guidelines were announced, June 23rd of 1976, Vellucci had his chance, and Cambridge opened its own hearings. The council would be making its own decision. So on this hot summer evening, about 500 people gathered in the City Hall chambers, filling the galleries with crowds standing outside listening to the speakers that were broadcasting the event. In attendance, we know were reporters from overseas, 4 TV stations, and we're told, quote, enough television lights to make the council chambers look like Fenway Park on a Friday night. Hours of heated testimony and debate ensued, and as The Atlantic would later report, the anger in the room was unmistakable. It was a dizzying experience for many. Counselor Leonard J. Russell told Science magazine that listening to the scientific debate made him feel fuzzy because
every time I think I understand an argument, someone pokes holes in it.
So the hearing was contentious and confusing. Never before had a town considered regulating a scientific technique. And you'll get a feel for the energy and the excitement directly from our eyewitnesses in the next session. You'll also have a chance to experience it for yourself in a recreation of the hearing at the play that we're staging, as you heard, this weekend and next, in those very same City Hall chambers where the debate took place 50 years ago.
So now we'll step forward. The hearing is ours to discover and talk about later in the day. But what happened after the hearing was equally contentious and also fairly confusing. And this is where a lot of the curiosity of historians, such as myself and Luis, has focused. Vellucci was proud of cutting the scientists down
to size. They are a factor in life, in this lifespan on Earth. They are as important as the man that collects the garbage in this city.
And so, Vellucci called for scientists, including present and future Nobel Prize winners, to take their acronyms down to Kendall Square Farmers Market to
sell their experimentation to the people alongside the hot dog stands and the ice cream stands and the flea market stands, to peddle their wares, such as DNA, to try to convince the buyers, which are the voters, that this is safe. It was like saying, this is a good hot dog, buy it.
And they would do so side by side with tables by Science for the People, wearing their t-shirts warning that genetic engineering may be hazardous to your health. Meanwhile, a subsequent July 7th meeting occurred under intense scrutiny at Cambridge City Hall. The council responded to this broad debate by creating the Cambridge Experimentation Review Board. The review board was an independent citizens committee with members that had no personal stake in supporting the research, a body that would study the issue of recombinant DNA and make recommendations to the council. In the meantime, however, the council decided that a 3-month moratorium on recombinant DNA research would be enforced in the city of Cambridge, to the frustration of scientists who thought the issue was overwrought. One of Harvard's associate deans was pessimistic, saying the issues involved were so complex, I don't think a community is equipped to make that decision. In a surprise development, the city manager, James Sullivan, ensured that the review board was filled entirely by non-scientists. Sullivan explained his decision as such. Scientists had not been able to agree so far, he observed, and there was no reason to expect that would change now. The review board heard testimony from a wide range of scientists and administrators involved with recombinant DNA. According to The Atlantic, the public has become the referee of last resort. The review board met twice a week and became on a first-name basis with the entire biochemical community of Cambridge. A nun, a nurse, a structural engineer, a social worker, a sociologist of science, and a 9-to-5 employee of Carter's Ink Company were collectively asked to evaluate the safety of the hottest research in molecular biology. They met for over 100 hours, acting as a kind of citizen jury. Their work in the summer and fall was not widely apparent and took longer than expected. The City Council extended its moratorium on recombinant DNA through the fall to give them more time to work.
Ultimately, the panel recommended that work could proceed in Cambridge. The ordinance was passed in January of 1977, prohibiting the most dangerous experiments, P4, and mandating that all recombinant DNA work would then be in compliance with NIH guidelines. And what's more, every organization conducting research in the city, NIH funded or not, would establish an institutional biohazards committee to report to the Public Health Department and the city's Committee on Biohazards. It seemed like a victory for science.
But debate continued in the public sphere beyond the Experimentation Review Board, beyond the chambers of City Hall, beyond the laboratories of Harvard and MIT. As events unfolded in Cambridge, this debate became a resonant issue that echoed far beyond City Hall. Cambridge became a touchstone for a national discussion over the local governance of recombinant DNA, whether for good or ill, and other cities followed suit with their own discussions of ordinances and hearings from 1976 through 1981. Vellucci got a lot of attention. Indeed, Vellucci's sustained drumbeat of criticism alarmed those discussing regulation in Congress and worldwide. The fear that the idiosyncratic actions of local legislatures seeking to act like rampaging Mayor Vellucci's seemed very real. So, as we saw in the video, recombinant DNA research does continue, and scientists have been quick to set the memory of what happened in Cambridge in 1976 in one of two ways. In one way, it's very easy to see it as a farce, with a character such as Mayor Vellucci, who one Harvard scientist called an unbelievable joke, and the tenor and atmosphere around the hearings themselves, which Science magazine deemed a circus. On the other hand, as you saw also with someone like Paul Berg and Janet Mertz, it might be considered a tragedy in which the good faith efforts of scientists to think about the dangers of their work end up threatening the pursuit of knowledge and academic freedom. Indeed, with the subsequent rapid relaxation of NIH guidelines, it was hard to see what the fuss was about. The Harvard facility that ignited this debate in Cambridge was never used. The experiments that were performed were performed in a normal laboratory. Nothing was sprayed. And indeed, in 1983, Harvard had to come up with another $1 million to convert the special laboratories back into offices.
So the twists of the resolution of this debate don't end there, and they make any kind of quick judgment of this affair as a tragedy or a farce a little bit more complicated. So even though the ordinance had called for ongoing public involvement in the biohazard review process, staffing members of the public on a new committee, things didn't play out exactly the way that had been anticipated. And we understand that Councillor Clem was furious to discover by the end of the summer of 1977 that the new committee had not yet met. What's more, by early 1978, it seemed like it might cease functioning entirely for lack of members. So the moral is therefore not quite as simple as saying that citizens controlled the science. Just what counted as ideal public participation was something that remained unclear and had to be worked out.
Indeed, the council couldn't even control its own ordinances. In an unrelated revision of the Health Code in 1978, it inadvertently deleted the entire recombinant DNA ordinance. This deletion wasn't even discovered for over a year until the first biotech company to choose to operate in Cambridge, Biogen, came to see about a permit. When it noticed the absence of the ordinance, however, it wanted it back on the books. This embrace of local regulation became the norm in Massachusetts biotechnology. Ironically, whereas some of the first leftist critiques of recombinant DNA had seen local regulation as a way of ensuring democracy and corporate accountability, by the 1990s, the greatest backers of local regulation were members of the biotechnology industry themselves, who thought it was far better to work within stable constraints than uncertain freedom. Remarkably, none other than Vellucci was there in 1982 to help Biogen open its new facilities, saying,
"I like recombinant DNA experiments, especially when they pay taxes."
So within this atmosphere of tragedy and farce and regulation, it turns out a little local regulation is actually a helpful thing for innovation. Today, as we know, and as you may have walked through on the way here, Cambridge is at the heart of the most vibrant biotechnology ecosystem in the world, perhaps because of, not in spite of, the discussions that happened in 1976. Predictable regulations in Cambridge allowed investment in the infrastructure that made the rest of the biotechnology industry possible.
So this is a flavor of what we've called the spirit of 76, and we wanted to use that to help think about how that might matter for us today. Because after all, the questions that were asked then are still questions that we ask today. As we've heard, who raises the alarm when new inventions bring new potential hazards? What's the line between a real understanding of potential hazards and mere speculation or fear-mongering? And who decides? Where are these issues discussed or debated and resolved? How does public trust in institutions relate to the regulation or other forms of governance of these potential hazards? And basically, to boil it all down, most importantly, what are we to do about it all? And it seems that everybody agrees that democratic engagement is a good thing and the best way forward until they have to do it. And then things start to get a little messy. So these sorts of questions and their ongoing salience are, in fact, the inspiration for the format of our symposium today. We'll hear next from some of the eyewitnesses to 1976 and how they think we should be understanding this event from 50 years ago. But then we'll pivot from the past towards today, and we'll be connecting in our later sessions with a variety of experts who are working at the frontiers of research today in synthetic biology and AI and in other fields to bring these questions forward into our current moment. And even though the technologies today might be new, of course, many of the issues and the dynamics might somehow seem strangely familiar to us when we're trying to figure out what does good governance of a new technology look like. How much of governance is based on accountability and how much is based on trust? And what happens when different ways of knowing from different kinds of expertise all come together into the same room? And finally, in our last session, we'll be turning to moments like this Cambridge 76 hearings to help us talk about our collective memory and sometimes even find lessons or insights. But the stories that we tell from these fragmented bits of evidence from the past, of course, are full of choices and involve a lot of skilled craft in raising and telling these sorts of stories here about how we might responsibly engage in public engagement on these issues that really do seem to be perennial. So in that sense, we might wonder if maybe the spirit of 76 is indeed also the spirit of 26. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll have some time for questions as we go throughout the day. And we have just a few moments now if anybody has any questions specifically for Robin and Luis before we move on to our eyewitnesses. Anything burning now? But don't worry, it won't be your last chance. So, well, great. I think we'll carry on. Was there one up there? Great.
Some comment on how Biogen managed the restrictions in Cambridge by basically moving their labs to Basel, Switzerland.
Could you identify yourself just so for everyone?
I'm Mark Staples. And yeah, I worked at Biogen from '88 through '97, so I wasn't here in those early years. But they kept their corporate headquarters in Cambridge, but they moved their lab space to Basel because they didn't have the lab restrictions there, and they then returned to Cambridge once they didn't have to deal with the lab restrictions. So I didn't know if that was widely known or not, but that was an interesting workaround that Biogen used successfully.
Yeah, thank you. So I will start by apologizing. I'm writing a book on the history of the biotech industry in the Boston area, and I've spent a lot of time looking at Biogen, and also Professor Phil Sharp is also up front here, who had his sort of a founder's eye perspective on it. But what I noticed is that there is this initial effort to not deal with the Cambridge problem by dispersing geographically, but by the early 80s, there also is a sense that there's hard to do research that way, and that having a site in the United States, within walking distance of a major laboratory, of a major university would be especially attractive, and that what makes them come back to the Boston area. And in Cambridge, in the words of one of their memos, the battle has already been fought. And so ironically, the fact that there was that debate made it easier for them to come in rather than going to a new city where the debate would have to happen all over again. So they're definitely concerned about it, but they also decide at a certain point it's worth working with the regulation.
My name's Michael Fisher, and I've been teaching in the STS program as well. I think this was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. I'm just curious, the one thing that I keep looking for in these discussions are the use of the tapes that were made of the Cambridge debates that were made by our colleague in the STS program, Charlie Weiner. And I wonder if you thought about using those tapes and how you made decisions between those tapes, the Nova film, which is terrific, and the play that we're going to see this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. So Charlie Weiner did extraordinary work in collecting a lot of these materials very shortly after the events happened, and he said that people were happy to give him reams of paper off their desk to be able to put in the collection. So we have used those collections in the distinctive collections here quite a bit. So the recording of the hearings is, of course, remarkable and extraordinary. For this session, we didn't want to take the steam out of hearing from the eyewitnesses themselves of what it was like to be there before we showed that. And then, of course, we have the play itself, where you'll be able to relive that in real time, as it were, 50 minutes instead of 4 hours, but the weather might be the same, we'll see. So indeed, it's an extraordinary resource, and we've used it a lot, we've referred to it a lot, and we've been helping the theater company kind of think about like what are other elements that could be brought in to help bring that back to life for us. So absolutely, the film is great. It's a strategic choice not to reveal it all just right yet.